Welcome back to our segments on doing business internationally, business around the globe. And this requires you as a manager and an executive of a company to have a greater understanding of the different cultures that you may see and deal with. We've talked in the past about Australia, the US, and the UK, managers from those countries. And now we're going to touch on France. How do business people in France do business? What are the different things about the way they communicate and hold business meetings and manage their staff? And what are the different ways they think about business? How do they view business structures? So let's take a look at that right now. Let's introduce France. I'm sure that many of you have had dealings with France in the past. Perhaps you are dealing now with some French counterparts. Are you finding it difficult? What are the things that you really worry about? Well, let's introduce France to you and give a bit of a background as to why things are the way they are. And that may help you better understand your French counterparts. We can say that in France, doing business, there are two particular elements more than in any other industrialized economy, that are very, very important. They play a great role in the way business is done. And these two essential ingredients, we could say, are the role of the government and the importance of certain types of education. So the role of the government does play a very important part in the way business is done, as does the importance of education level. So, the French government has played, we could say, for many, many, many decades, a central and vital role in shaping the direction of French companies ever since the Second World War. We're talking now about past 1940s, we're into the 1950s. So 50, 60 years onwards, the government has played a very major role in how business is done. Even in the late 80s, the government was fostering the development of a number of national champion companies. We could say that these were national champions, companies who could be seen as great champions of the country, who would be large enough to take on global competition. So the government has been behind this build-up, behind this development, which is quite extraordinary. One of the interesting things about the government intervening this way and trying to build national champion companies is that they have been largely accepted by mainstream business. And therefore business in France has been working hand in hand, we could say, with civil servants in many, many ministries. We find here a combination of companies working hand in hand with the government in a very special way in France. And this level of cooperation has been helped along and assisted by the French education system. Why, you may ask? Why? Because the French education system pushes the brightest pupils through a system of elite schools known as the Grande École. So there is great emphasis on making sure the best and the brightest are pushed forward so they can come through to senior positions, both in government and in business. Graduates of the Grande École seem to enter large commercial organizations, major corporations, or the government service, and this creates a kind of educational brotherhood, a brotherhood that has created a kind of affinity in thinking across senior levels of French business society. We find that there is an escalated level of thinking at this higher echelon, this higher level. So there is a great move to push forward the national champion attitude or thinking at a high level and move the country forward that way through cooperation between senior government and major business. This is quite extraordinary. So French business society is taking on a different approach. It has, since the Second World War, a different approach to the way that French industry enters the global environment. It's even been said, actually, that the best way in France to become a CEO is of a major company is through a senior position in an important ministry. So there is a great deal of regard this way for the government, senior ministry officials, senior ministry personnel, a great deal of respect between them and senior business levels. So we find that this is the way things are done in France. This is the view, this is their take on how industry can excel and how industry can prosper for the country. So, if this is the case, let's have a look at the business structures that in France they follow. If we have this cooperation between senior ministry and high echelons, the high levels of senior business and organizations, let's look at their structures. We would think that the companies tend towards a rigid hierarchy and functionality within the system, which each senior minister or senior civil servant follows, as well as his CEO. So the CEO or the senior minister would hold great sway. They would hold great roles of responsibility and in these organizations, in French companies. So we find that there is a rigid hierarchy. And functionality is important. Very functional. Systems are met. Systems are provided. Systems are put in place. Everything functions very, very strongly. So the future direction is held in the hands of really the top figure, the PDG or the CEO. So senior management, therefore, is more directive rather than collaborative. We have a rigid hierarchy. So we have senior management giving instructions. The vision is given down the line for implementation by the junior management. So we do have that rigid hierarchy because of the view and the way things are done in the business model. There is less collaboration, less discussion in this kind of system than you would find in the UK or in the Australian way of doing things. So you find here things are a little bit different. And you may have experienced that in your dealings so far with your French counterparts. The power which is given and vested in the hands of the top civil servant or the CEO obviously adds to the fact that this is a very centralist approach to doing business. And it's a very centralist approach that is undertaken and seen throughout the French way of life as well, not only in the business circles. Below the top levels, you will find that there is a strict hierarchy of managers, organized by rigid functional lines, all reporting lines leading eventually to the top, leading to the CEO, leading to the PDG. So this is a very strict business model. The structures are quite strict. If you're from a less hierarchical background, you may think that this kind of approach seems to be rather difficult to deal with, but it is actually well suited to the operations and the way things are done in France, the way companies and the government indeed works with companies to accelerate and develop business. Results are produced. Things perform well. So this is particular to the French way of doing business and structuring business. The weakness of this system, this very rigid hierarchical and functioning line system, may come about or may be apparent only when problems arise and quick responses are needed. If quick decisions need to be made or quick responses are needed to tackle any situation that might arise, if there's little buy-in, or down the line people are not involved in or don't have any ownership of the project or what's going on, then there may not be a sense of responsibility attached to what is going on and to problem solve or deal with situations. People may say, oh, well, let the upper levels deal with it, they're in the system. So that's perhaps a downside to this kind of approach to business. However, it's working. It works in France. So this is the way things are structured. When you're dealing with your French counterparts, be open and knowledgeable of this particular business structure and the importance that's placed on dealing between ministries and the higher levels of both ministries and senior people in organizations, major organizations. So therefore, we come to the way things are managed. We understand it's very hierarchical, very formal and functional. So let's have a look at the managers of the most senior managers, we could say, of French companies. In most French companies, senior managers perhaps were educated at the Grande École, which are the elite schools of France. These are colleges or universities which have a very high standard, very high level of education and are seen to be very prestigious indeed. So these colleges champion what we say an intellectual rigor in their students. The intellectual capability of the students, of the graduates of these colleges is highly regarded. And this is quite unique. It is quite rarely matched elsewhere in the world. This system of championing intellectual rigor or intellectual ability. So this is why we can say that this level of education or type of intellectual education produces a highly educated management population. And members of this management population approach management with quite an unusual degree of academic precision. So this level of intellectualism is regarded very highly, and it is cherished in France. Graduating from one of these colleges or universities where intellectual champions of management are produced is something that is very, very respected. However, there have been comments made as to whether this idea seems to work. Is it going to work in practice? It seems all right in theory, but indeed, will this work in practice? That's one point to think about yourself. But there still is this high regard for these top management to have graduated with high academic degrees. So management is basically seen as a more intellectual task to be mastered and thought about in terms of rather detailed analysis. And the complete mastery of all of the complex concepts and information and details in management itself is certainly something to be mastered. More pragmatic things, more down-to-earth things like motivating staff, etc., are not as prominent in French management thinking as they are in the UK or in any other country, perhaps. So we can see here that very much the academic qualification is a very important part of being a manager. It could be changing in the future, that may not be quite the case, but it is still intrinsically very, very strong in the system. These academic qualifications are seen to be the ones that will help you make rational decisions, will help you be able to complete your tasks and fulfill your tasks as a CEO or a manager. On the other hand, many other countries do think that the more pragmatic applying skills approach, down-to-earth approach, is a more positive way to go. So management structures vary. Decisions in France, in French companies, once taken at senior levels, will be passed down to the lower management for implementation. There's not a lot of open discussion and debate. Once they are made, and then they are expected to be implemented. So this is how we see the functional lines. Things have to produce things. So there is a function for every step of the way. This directive approach, this very direct way of approaching things, can be seen especially from non-hierarchical background people as being very, very overly authoritative and lacking in, let's say, necessary team-building elements, lacking in the interpersonal relationship elements of management. So highly directive approach, highly functional approach, highly authoritative, as some people see, is the approach in French companies, lacking in perhaps some more softer skills approaches to doing business and managing people. You may think back to your particular experiences so far if you've been dealing with French companies. It could be that your experiences are falling into the subjects we are discussing right now, into what is happening right now. Or you may find that some of your counterparts are indeed more open. Let's hope that perhaps whatever way it is, you can work together. You can move together and try to find common ground, which is one of the most essential points to international relations between cultures. Finding common ground to work well together. So let's take a look at the way meetings are conducted. We've talked about America, we've talked about Australia, we've talked about the UK. How about in France? We know that it's a very directive approach that they use in the management style. So because of that, because the management style tends to the directive approach, then meetings are more often seen as places of giving information of decisions previously made, rather than for open debate of difficult situations or points for discussion. So here we have a difference. Information is shared and given. Discussions are not so much had in meetings. They are more directive meetings to impart with information. They will be chaired by the boss, of course, being a directive business model and management style. They will be chaired by the boss and definitely follow a set of agenda stipulated by the manager or in charge, the boss. It could be said that such formal meetings, in these meetings, it would be rare to contradict the boss openly. This would have been done somewhere else, for example, not in the actual meeting. It would have been done perhaps in a smaller meeting before this one, or in a smaller discussion prior to the meeting, or in some informal kind of lobbying session where a lot of debate was had. But when it comes to main meetings, normally a contradictory statement would not be made to the boss at that time. Sometimes it might appear that meetings appear to just be an approval of what was decided before, like a rubber stamp, we say, just approving what had been decided. So it becomes rather routine. Often this is what they are, because discussions had been held informally before. In such an environment as this, it's vital to be actively involved, therefore, in the pre-meeting lobbying. If you want to have any influence, if you want to make any real contribution. So be aware of this. There are lots of pre-lobbying meetings that go on prior to more formal meetings in the French way of doing things. So you have to be open and be wary and be listening and looking for those pre-lobbying meetings where you can discuss and debate. Then you will find that once those decisions have been made at those discussions, those informal discussions, you can go into the main meetings knowledgeable that you have been heard. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult for you to really speak up and speak from the basics of things. Meetings which take place between peers, same level people without the presence of a senior figure, are more open and less rigid. So bear that in mind. If you're all at the same level, then you can, relax a little bit, and things are not as strict and as rigid. But when you do come to the major meeting with the boss in charge as a chairman, then it becomes more formal and rigid. In the meetings which are less rigid and more open debate sometimes gets very hot. The French have a lovely way of wanting to discuss things very, very verbally. They're not afraid to say what they speak. Some people want to defend their ideas very, very passionately. They cherish their logic. This comes from the basis of their schooling, from the education, from this intellectualism, which is quite pervasive throughout all society. The great ability to debate and to argue and give your point of view, to have your intellectual capability right at the forefront of your discussions. So therefore you will find discussions become rather heated. Strong information can come up, strong confrontation can come up, and this reflects the sense of competition that is building up in that meeting, the sense of dedication that there is of the people involved in that meeting. And you will see that this is quite a frequent thing that happens. You may think that there is only the major meeting where decisions are rubber stamped, but that is not the case. Remember, when you're down at the levels of meetings prior to the main meetings, this is where all of the things are discussed. So give your input. Here, don't stand back. If you also have something to say, then go into it with the same level of enthusiasm that can be matched with your counterpart. You also have passion about what you think. You also have ability to think about things and what needs to be done. So air your opinions. Your French counterparts will be happy at that. Then the process will go to the next level when you can put things in place and more formally agree on certain decisions that are made. So meetings certainly will take place in a different way, perhaps compared to Australians, the UK, and also to American style of meetings. Teamwork in France. How do teams function in France? Have you been a part of a project team? Or indeed, are you going to be setting up a team with French members and Vietnamese members? Will you have to manage that team and ensure that it reaches results? If so, what do you need to know about teamwork and your French counterparts? Well, let's take a look at this. The education system, as we know, fosters a sense of perhaps rivalry and competition from an early age because people want to get into good schools and people want to excel and be very, very good at what they do. Education is important. And peers, your colleagues, you're all competing to pass an entrance exam to gain entry, as I said, into the elite grande école. This is very, very important in the French education system. So right from a very early age, this level of rivalry and competition exists to be very, very good and to get into the best place possible. There's nothing actually wrong with that. The teamwork, the nature of teams and team working certainly is different in that it is not encouraged in this process, in this education system. And therefore, it doesn't really come naturally later in working life. So, as young children, as French children vie to become better and get into the right schools and get the best education, it's very much or they're out for themselves kind of attitude rather than more a collaborative, collective approach to developing oneself. So therefore, people prefer to have a definable personal set of objectives rather than working in more general team roles. So when we see growing up through an education system where you are more or less looking after yourself and trying to get very good education, in the business working life, as you go into that and as you progress through that, also your individualism is reflected in the way that you view teamwork. Teams are often defined as sets of specialists working on a single issue for a strong leader in France, rather than the leader being a part of the team. Here we find that you have a strong leader, the boss, and then you have your systems in place, and you have people who have very specialized ability to contribute to that team objective. Quite different to some of the other countries that we have mentioned. So teams are very functional. Teams are very specific. Teams are arranged between functional lines for the purpose of promoting one particular project, similar in some ways to the US, and are often difficult to implement. Sometimes the loyalties between teams are divided between the project team and the home base of the team member. So sometimes there is rivalry amongst the teams. Because people are highly specialized, they don't want to promote something over another thing. They want to consider only their particular field of specialty. And therefore you find that implementing certain things are difficult because there's no overlap. People are not willing to be flexible. So teamwork with your French counterparts may take on a different approach to those in the UK and Australia. They may be quite similar to those in the US, however. So think of yourself when you're involved in a team, if you are part of a team, or if you are managing a team indeed. Be mindful of the different approaches and why people do the things they do in teams. Why do your French counterparts behave the way they do? Why do your Australian, your UK and your US counterparts behave the way they do? Basically comes from the education system and the business models that they follow and the business structures that they follow in their own cultures. Be mindful of these things and you will be able to move forward and find common ground. It doesn't mean actually that you will like all the way things are done. You may actually not enjoy the way that an Australian team may work compared to your French counterparts in their team. You may not agree with all things. This is why I say find common ground. You have to discuss and open, as we talked about communication amongst cultures in our previous session. You have to be open. You have to speak up. Find common ground and what works. And then you will be able to move forward. Communicating. How do you communicate with your French counterparts? What is different about the way they communicate to the way you communicate? So let's take a look. The way in which you say something in France is almost as important as what is actually said. This means that people are very, very dedicated to what they say. The power of the word is all important in France. Your speech is very, very important. The French are passionate about their language. It is often thought that French is one of the most romantic, or is the most romantic languages of all. And there is a great love of and respect for the elegance of the use of language in France. And the way that things can be presented, particularly if they are presented in a sophisticated way, it raises the language to almost an art form. And this is a great thing for the French. They have a great sense of national pride about their language. And it makes it difficult, actually, very much for them to listen to a language that is spoken badly. Or even worse, if you have to read something in French and you speak French in a very, very bad way with mistakes in it, etc., and it's poorly spoken, then that is not considered very highly by the French. So if your French is not very good and you speak poor French, then by all means, please use English. Try not to even go one step further with your faltering French. It will not be regarded at all. You'll be Actually, you'll look like a bit of an idiot. You'll be thought of very nicely. However, language is the absolute important thrust of the French people, and so be very mindful of that. Think of, remember, the education, the background, the grande école, the spoken word being the most important thing. So language itself is exceptionally important. Debate in France can often be seen as highly confrontational. If you come from a softer society, a more Asian background, you're more diplomatic as opposed to direct culture, then you will see that the debate in France seems to be almost like a fight. It is very distinctive, and it sometimes is very confusing, because in France the French want to draw a lot of distinctions between things rather than basing communication around similarities of things. They find that it's a test, it's an intellectual goal almost, to be able to define the differences of something rather than the similarities between them. And therefore, building on the similarities is not seen as such a positive thing. It's best to build on what the differences are between things that bring out the positives of that subject. And during discussions, you will find interruptions often occur, with emotions that seem to be running quite high. People's voices get louder, the speech gets faster and faster, and sometimes, perhaps some thumping on the table or some animated discussion will occur. It's a little bit theatrical, we could say, in some ways. And it is, as in Australia and as in England, discussing and opening up debate with great discussions like this is viewed as being conducive to reaching the end result. It brings about outcomes. It brings about opinions and comments that must be listened to and heard and discussed. So if you are from, as I said, a more indirect culture, you will find this a little bit difficult to absorb perhaps in the beginning, but view it as something constructive. It is just the nature of the people, the nature of the communication style. It is not meant to hurt anybody in any way or offend anybody. So you can also come halfway. Remember, always come halfway. See where you can find common ground to help, common ground to communicate your ideas. The French almost admire well-defined ideas and logical explanations of ideas. And you quite often hear them say, it is not logical. You will quite hear them say this because they have a patterning, a way of thinking that is quite logically put in place, coming from, as we know, their education and the way they think. So when they see something and it's quite confusing and they say it is not logical, then think of that remark. They are indicating to you that there are problems that lie ahead, and therefore you may need to look more closely for logic in your argument. You may need to look more closely at what is being presented. They have a very definite way of looking at logic and looking for logic. In France too, and dealing with your French counterparts, written business French is extremely formal and follows a lot of protocol, follows a lot of standards and rules and regulations. And it's an etiquette which can sometimes seem to be very tedious, but it is very important. It is important to be seen to write very well and check everything that is written, particularly in French. The ability to produce correct written language is seen really as a sign of intelligence and good education by the French. This is based on how they believe their language is and the importance of language and the importance of intellectualism. So if you are going to prepare any documents in French for your business counterparts, most definitely have them prepared by absolute experts and professionals in business writing. It's absolutely essential for the success of your business activities. Communicating in French, communicating in France. Don't speak unless you are perfect at the language, and your written skills, leave it up to the professionals. Don't try to be halfway. Leave it to the professionals who can translate and are grammatically correct with all the concepts and everything in place. So we have different communication styles. It is up to you to find common ground and to meet halfway, as I have said. Don't be afraid when people get animated and emotional. That is the nature of the people. They are not blaming you. They are not pointing at you saying you are causing this problem. It is just how they debate. If you have seen any television shows with the French debating in Parliament, or if you've seen any French speakers, or any television game shows and such on in France, people debate and discuss and are very, very open and are very happy to talk and talk and talk. So this is their nature. We find, as we do in many, many countries now that you are doing business with, women in business are gaining increasingly prominent positions in business life. And we could say that in France particularly, there is great representation of women in the retail and service industries. Service industries being where customers, clients, buyers, everybody is wanting a product, and women particularly are excelling in this particular industry in prominent positions as well. Of course, less progress is being made in the more engineering-based industries, and this is something that is similar to the UK counterparts as well. Inside Paris, however, women are there. So you will find that in French business life, you will be dealing a lot with female business counterparts. Of course, you'll be dealing with men as well, but open your mind up to the fact that this is increasing. In all of the countries we have discussed, in Australia, in the US, and in the UK, women in business are a very powerful force, and women in government are becoming also a very powerful force. So there will be prominent people that you'll be dealing with, and you might find that you are dealing with women. Indeed, in your own country as well, here in Vietnam, women are increasing in the roles, particularly in management. It could be perhaps faster that they should increase in those positions, but that will happen. That will come. And the dress codes. Well, we are in France. If you're looking at France particularly, dress codes vary with the position within the company and the industrial sector and region in France. The higher the position, of course, within a larger organization, the more formal the dress code will be. And quite often you will find a formal suit and a tie being worn, quite formal. The French are renowned for their fashion expertise all over the world. So if you are indeed traveling to France, be prepared, dress up, and go into your meeting prepared in the dress code that will help you feel better about yourself. Particularly in France, if you go in unprepared and you go in looking undressed, you look as though you just threw a few things on together and didn't really think about your appearance, that will be not well regarded. The French are very proud of fashion. They're very proud of the way people look and style and fashion. So do look well dressed, well groomed. Do look smart. And actually, if you do dress in this way and you do dress formally, it gives you a little bit of more confidence, to deal with situations. You feel better. You feel the part. You walk taller. You act differently when you know you look good. So that's an important thing to remember. The further you travel in France, the further south, it becomes a little bit less formal. And you could wear open shirts and trousers or slacks. That's quite okay. But basically, if you're dealing in major businesses in Paris or major cities up there in the central to northern regions, dress more formally. So well-presented appearance. Casual does not mean scruffy, but appearances are important at all times. Casual is for casual situations. Formal is for business. So let's keep that as a general rule. Then you can play it safe and you won't go wrong. Actually, it's a general rule that you can follow almost in all countries we have discussed, and you will be quite fine with that. So we find, now we come to summarize the tips of doing business across cultures, particularly in France. We'll summarize these and try to imprint them in your mind if you are dealing with French companies. Tip number 1, education is important. The background and the intellectual dexterity, the intellectual ability are very, very important things in France with the French people. I'm sure that you have finally understood this with your experience with dealing with your French counterparts. So it is very true, it is very real. So this is a very important thing that you must always keep in your mind. Tip number 2, the relationship between the government and industry in France is very, very close, closer than many other industrialized nations. And this has therefore seen many senior civil servants taking senior roles in industry. There's a natural progression for the senior ministry officials to go over into industry. And this is how it runs. This is how it traditionally works. Tip number 3, long-term planning. This has been the key to the French approach for business for many, many decades and leads to detailed forward planning by many companies. So this is where we see very strict rules and very much forward planning and long-term planning playing a major part of any business operation. The long term. What is the benefit for the long term? Not short-sightedness, not short-term planning, although that does exist in its role, in its place. But long-term planning is the central tenet of the French approach to business. So this is something you need to bear in mind when you're dealing with your projects and you're looking at your goals and objectives and where you want to be with your French counterparts and your partners in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. This is important. The long-term planning plays a major role. Tip number 4. Most companies, because of the centralist approach to business and the government and industry linkage, you would find that most major French companies have their headquarters in Paris, and most decisions will be made at head office. So it's very centralist, very much approached that way. Tip number 5, the CEO of a French company is usually the top charismatic leader, highly charismatic, who guides the general direction of the company, but he guides it very much in an authoritarian manner. So this guy is the boss. He is the almighty. He is the all-powerful. He has the ability to do anything. He is the one that runs the show. So that is where the power is located, right at the top. Usually that is the case. And normally, the French like to have a leader who is charismatic, who has passion, who has an ability to draw people in and inspire and speak very, very well, as we understand. So this is very important as well. Tip number 6. To summarize, French companies have rigid hierarchies, not flat, with only 4 or 5 levels, they have quite rigid hierarchies. Upward reporting and decision-making lines up there. Very, very much so this way. This is the way the business is structured. So think about that when you're doing business and when you're having to have decisions made. Know that sometimes the people you are speaking with are not the ones who are going to be making those decisions. They will be made up higher and higher and higher. So this is something you need to pay attention to. Tip number 7. Socializing across the hierarchical lines, all the different levels, is quite unusual. The team orientation, the team collaborative, collective spirit is not the same as it is in other countries we have discussed. So socializing has its certain levels. Hierarchies stay within hierarchies. Socializing happens within the hierarchy, but it's not quite usual to have it across the hierarchies. Tip number 8. Promotion is gained through a combination of things, and that is seniority, education, achievement, and finally, demonstrated competence. So there are 3 elements involved here, and they are 3 very important elements to the French. So how long you've been in the company, your educational achievement. As we have seen, it's quite different to Australia, for instance, or in the UK. The educational achievement is highly regarded in France and considered. And then demonstrated competence, what you have actually proven to be able to do. Tip number 5, the management styles. Remember, this is directive with instructions or commands being given at meetings to subordinates and down the ranks. The meetings are more information style meetings rather than discussions, problem solvings amongst the team. So they're very much dissemination of information and giving instructions to get some things done and implemented. Tip number 10. If you have some things to argue or you have some differences of opinion with the boss, that will not actually be seen to be done in open or informal meetings. Any such disagreements are usually aired in a pre-meeting lobbying session or in a discussion prior to a formal meeting. So you don't see much of that open debate as you might have seen in the other countries or cultures we have discussed. It's strictly done at a proper place and a proper time, not in a general open meeting. This is something to remember. Tip 11. Sometimes managing project teams can be difficult because there is competitiveness amongst peers. As we know, being brought up through the education system, this is something that is pervasive throughout the society, and therefore managing cross-functional teams, project teams, sometimes is difficult. Tip number 12. Logic is expected and respected. So therefore, understanding the way that the French think, and they've been brought up in their educational system of things, then they expect you to have logical arguments. Don't think illogically. If you do, then they will pick you up immediately. They will find that illogical part in your argument. They will think it's sloppy. They will think that there is a lack of intelligence if you have no logical basis in your argument. This is a very important factor to remember, perhaps one of the most important things in your communication style. So prepare yourself, study up on the information that you have in your discussions, and make sure everything is logical. Tip 13. In France, there is less job hopping than in some other countries. The French are traditionally or one company focused people in their professional life. This is quite different. In the last segment, we talked about the UK and indeed Australia in previous sessions, and in America as well. Job hopping is now a more thing that we see, a more normal thing that we see, and it's not a negative thing. But in France, traditionally, people are one company or even maybe two company people in their professional lives. So there's less job hopping there. Perhaps in the future that will change, but it's something to think about. You will see your same counterparts for quite some time in their French company. Tip 14. First names are used amongst your peer group, usually. Sometimes though, surnames are often reverted to in more formal situations or when dealing with superiors. So just follow the flow, follow your host and follow the rule as you see it unfolding in a meeting. Of course, if you have very strong relations, good relations with your client or your French counterpart, that's different and you will know. But generally just follow and see how things move along. For superiors, definitely use surnames. Monsieur so-and-so would be quite fine. That will keep you out of harm's way. You will not be any trouble for using that. Tip number 15. Remember, we talked about the language. And eloquence is an important attribute, and the French managers will often try to dominate people through the force of their rhetoric. This means your French manager, your French counterpart, will be very proud of his ability to speak and try to use his words, and he will feel very proud of using those words. And he will use very wonderful words. It's almost as if he's making a political speech in some ways. So this is the nature of the culture, the nature of the language, as we have said in the main body of this segment. Tip 16. Written communication must be grammatically correct. I don't think that needs to be said anymore. Be very precise with that. Tip 17. Be careful using humor in France. Unlike the Australians or the British, French are very particular about humor, and it has to be very clever humor. And it must be able to translate well. So unless you are capable in the French language and very capable in this, just be very careful using humor. In very serious situations, they are more likely to be very serious. Unlike the Australians or the British, be very careful. Watch your French counterparts and be moderate. Don't be excessively humorous. It may not work. You will find yourself in trouble. Tip 18. The French, they separate family life and business life quite strongly. Unlike the US or the UK or the Australians, indeed. The French are very particular. Business is business, family is family. So there's a strong separation between those two things. So be mindful of that when you're trying to arrange meetings and so forth. Tip 19. The French love food, as we know, and so business lunches can sometimes be quite long and are seen really as a more relationship-building occasion than a plan to discuss the finer points of a contract. So it's more or less a great chance to get to know each other, to break the ice, to talk through things, bond a little bit, get to know the general things about business, but don't ever expect that something will be solved and decided over lunch, particularly points of a contract. Tip number 20. Punctuality varies. In France, you may find that people are more punctual than they are in the provinces. Here, when you have French counterparts coming to your meetings here, I would think that they would try to be on time, but not exceedingly late. Finally, we come to entertaining. And as I said, in the countries and the cultures we've covered, perhaps in France, entertaining is a passion. It is more or less a way of life. And it's true to say that food is important to the French. Food is as important to the French, and that business entertaining should be considered a matter of great importance. Business lunches are quite often a common form of entertaining business contacts, with breakfast and evening meetings or events being much rarer. So lunch is the way people go in France. Whenever you're there, lunch is big time. You will be seeing the whole city stop for lunch. In America, as I mentioned to you, there are business meetings from breakfast time from 7 a.m. upward and even after work. But here in France, lunch is the time to have any kind of business discussion if you wish to do so. It's quite a grand affair, and the whole thing is not just a quick lunch at the pub kind of deal in France, as it might be in the UK. Usually you will have a starter, a main course, and a dessert, followed by coffee. And wine will quite often be served. So this is the natural way of having lunch. And lunch is important. Lunch is a very important meal of the day for the French. The quality of the food is a matter of great national pride, and talking about food is an obsession. Deciding on a restaurant, your host will think very, very carefully about where to take you to make sure that everything is perfect. And on the whole, you are much better advised to talk about the food or other social interests during lunch than the actual business itself. As I mentioned before, you will not get final deals signed over lunch. The meal is a time for cementing those relationships and learning more about each other. And business matters maybe should only be raised at the end part of the meal, when you're having coffee. So you've had a chance to have your fun and enjoy yourself. French like to enjoy themselves, and food is part of that enjoyment process. So enjoy your lunch, enjoy your meal, and then when you get to the coffee, then you can talk a little bit about those subjects you want to bring up for the next meeting perhaps, or what you are going to be here to talk to them about over the next week or however long you're in France. Now, if you are inviting your French contacts out to lunch, make sure you do take them to a good quality restaurant. And unless you're an expert, let them choose the wine. Please do that. It's a great thrill. They love to choose the wine, I'm sure. They know so much about French wine. So please let them do that and be part of the process. Then you are also building the relationship together. Restaurants usually include a service charge, but it is still customary to leave a small tip as well. Tipping is not compulsory, as like in some countries, US for example, and sometimes UK, but 10% if you're going to leave an extra tip for the waiter after you've had a very enjoyable lunch with your business partner, then if you leave about 10%, that's quite adequate. That's quite acceptable. I do hope that through this segment on doing business with your counterparts from France, that you have been able to gain some in-depth information that will help you in the way you communicate and the way you manage your project teams with your French partners. Always remember that when you're dealing with cultures, other cultures, there's a halfway meeting point. Not one person is better than the other. Not one party is better than the other. Not one party is more correct than the other in the way that you conduct yourselves. It's just how you are. It's how things are. And whether your education system or the cultures or the family life or the nature of the business structures of the country has caused you to behave the way you are, then you have to acknowledge these things and come halfway when dealing in an international arena with your counterparts. The sooner you are able to meet halfway and have a laugh about the differences that exist between you to find common ground, that is when you will be able to excel in your business. Thank you very much for joining me on doing international business with your counterparts from France. I look forward to seeing you in our next segment. Goodbye.